Alright, let's talk about one of the most elusive and enigmatic factions in the Warhammer 40k universe, the Vanus Temple. When people think of the Officio Assassinorum, they usually picture a cold-blooded Vindicare sniper lining up the perfect shot, a shape-shifting Calidus slipping through enemy ranks, or an unstoppable Eversor slaughtering everything in sight. But Vanus Temple, they're different. They don't pull triggers, they don't wield poison blades, and they don't revel in the carnage of battle. Instead, they deal in something far more insidious: information warfare. What makes them truly terrifying isn't their combat prowess, but their ability to reshape reality itself. The assassins of Vanus don't need to kill their targets directly. They don't even need to be in the same system. Instead, they orchestrate disasters, manipulate data, and spread chaos so precisely that their enemies destroy themselves. You'll never hear a Vanus assassin coming because they don't come at all. When their work is done, it just looks like fate itself conspired against you. A whispered rumor, a forged transmission, a miscalculation in supply chains, and suddenly, entire war zones collapse. Key figures are disgraced or executed, and empires crumble under the weight of their own missteps. Despite their terrifying efficiency, the Vanus Temple remains the least understood of all Imperial assassin clades. They operate from the shadows of the shadows, leaving no trace of their existence. While a Vindicare might leave behind a shell casing and a Calidus might be exposed in a desperate final act, Vanus agents leave only a trail of whispers, misinformation, and inexplicable coincidences that lead to their target's downfall. This absolute anonymity is why many within the Imperium itself either dismiss their existence as myth or refuse to acknowledge just how deeply they influence the galaxy. So, who are these ghostly manipulators? How do they function, and just how much control do they truly exert over the Imperium's fate? If you think the grimdark future of the 41st millennium is shaped by armies and primarchs, you might just be looking at the wrong battlefield. Let's uncover the silent war of the Vanus Temple. The origins of the Vanus Temple are as elusive as the assassins themselves. Unlike the more well-known temples of the Officio Assassinorum, which have clear roots in the age of the Imperium and trace their origins to the direct will of the Emperor, Vanus operates in a space that feels almost unwritten. There are records, scattered and fragmented, that suggest they existed even before the Horus Heresy, but trying to confirm those accounts is like chasing ghosts. And honestly, that fits their whole aesthetic, doesn't it? A temple that specializes in information warfare and manipulation wouldn't want its own history to be clearly documented. If anything, the fact that their origins are so vague is just another testament to their skill. What little we do know paints an interesting picture. Unlike Vindicare, Calidus, Eversor, or Culexus, the Vanus Temple was never about physical elimination. Their founding philosophy was built around the belief that death wasn't the only way to remove an enemy. A well-placed lie, a sabotaged supply line, a forged transmission. These could be even more effective than a bullet to the skull. Where the Vindicare Temple perfected the art of the sniper kill and the Calidus Temple mastered infiltration, Vanus refined the concept of systemic collapse. It's believed that during the Great Crusade, when the Emperor was expanding his dominion across the stars, Vanus operatives worked behind the scenes, destabilizing target worlds long before the Imperial army or the Astartes ever landed. And that's what sets them apart from every other assassin temple. The others rely on physical prowess, enhanced physiology, and highly specialized weaponry. Vanus? They don't need any of that. Their weapon is knowledge, or more accurately, a control over knowledge. Their agents are data miners, information brokers, and master tacticians who see battlefields in a way no other force in the Imperium can. They aren't fighters, but they are warriors in a war of intelligence, where a single wrong piece of information can be deadlier than an orbital bombardment. Some believe that the Vanus Temple was born from the early intelligence networks of the Imperium, possibly even a precursor to the Inquisition's more shadowy operations. Others theorize that their methods stem from the Emperor himself, that he foresaw the need for a silent war fought not with bolters or laser guns, but with disinformation and subterfuge. And then there's the more radical idea, one that some fans whisper about in darker corners of the lore. What if the Vanus Temple was never truly loyal to the Imperium to begin with? What if their mastery of deception runs so deep that even the High Lords of Terra don't truly understand what they're dealing with? It wouldn't be the first time an Imperial organization outgrew its leash. And let's be real, if any temple was going to quietly reshape the Imperium for its own hidden agenda, it would be Vanus. No one knows the full extent of their influence because no one is allowed to know. If they can erase enemies from history, forge entire narratives, and collapse planetary governments with nothing but well-placed whispers, who's to say they haven't rewritten their own story as well? Of course, there are counter-arguments. Some believe that the Vanus Temple isn't as all-powerful as the myths suggest, that their methods, while effective, have limitations. After all, the Imperium is a place where brute force reigns supreme, and a well-placed bolter round often speaks louder than the most intricate web of lies. But even if that's true, it doesn't change the fact that their existence fundamentally challenges how we think about power in Warhammer 40K. Are they the most dangerous of the Officio Assassinorum? Maybe, maybe not. But one thing is certain, they are the hardest to see coming. And in the grim darkness of the far future, that might just be the deadliest weapon of all. If there's one thing that makes the Vanus Temple truly terrifying, it's their philosophy of assassination. Because unlike the other assassin clades, they don't believe in the necessity of direct killing. They don't need to infiltrate enemy strongholds, they don't require enhanced reflexes or deadly weapons, and they certainly don't charge into combat like the rabid killers of the Eversor Temple. Instead, they operate under a radically different doctrine. Why risk being seen when you can make your enemies destroy themselves? It all comes down to control. The Vanus Temple sees warfare not as a contest of strength, but as a puzzle, one where every piece, every faction, and every individual is just a variable to be manipulated. In their eyes, a war isn't won by who has the biggest guns or the strongest warriors, but by who controls the flow of information. If you know where the enemy is going to be before they even decide it themselves, you can end a war before it even starts. If you control the rumors that spread through a hive city, you can collapse a planetary government without a single shot being fired. That's the Vanus way. To understand how they operate, you need to throw out everything you think an assassin should be. In the Officio Assassinorum, most temples focus on physical elimination, bullet to the head, dagger in the back, a genetically enhanced monster rampaging through enemy lines. It's all about the act of killing. But Vanus? They play the long game. They find ways to erase their targets from history itself, to dismantle entire power structures so that the assassination becomes almost incidental. When Vanus eliminates a target, it's not just one person who dies. It's everything that person built, everything they represented, everyone connected to them. Think about how fragile the Imperium already is. It's held together by bureaucracy, superstition, and a desperate need for order. But what happens if a key piece of information gets altered? If a planetary governor receives a false communique declaring them a traitor? If a chapter master is given evidence, entirely fabricated, that their closest allies are in league with chaos? What happens when trade routes mysteriously collapse, supply chains fail, and an entire imperial sector turns against itself over a misunderstanding that was never supposed to happen? That's Vanus. That's their work. And what's even more unsettling is how little proof they leave behind. The Calidus assassins, for all their shape-shifting prowess, still rely on direct interaction. Vindicare snipers still leave a bullet casing behind. Even the dreaded Calexis, unnatural as they are, leave psychic scars in their wake. But how do you track an enemy that never physically arrives? How do you fight an opponent who doesn't need to set foot on your world to bring about your downfall? There are stories, whispers really, about entire military campaigns that ended in disaster, not because of battlefield mistakes, but because something else was at play. False orders, misinterpreted intelligence, perfectly timed accidents. And by the time anyone suspects foul play, the war is already lost. Of course, there are those who argue that Vanus shouldn't even be considered true assassins. Some fans of Warhammer 40k debate whether their methods fit within the Officio Assassinorum at all. After all, aren't assassins supposed to be killers? Shouldn't their actions involve some kind of direct elimination? But that's exactly what makes them so terrifying. They aren't just killers. They are architects of destruction. They don't assassinate individuals. They assassinate entire narratives, entire belief systems. They can unmake a warlord not by cutting his throat, but by making his own people turn against him, by planting the right rumors, by ensuring that when the final blow lands, it comes from the hands of someone the target once trusted. And that leads to an even darker question. How much of what we think we know about the Imperium is even real? If the Vanus Temple can fabricate entire conflicts, manipulate the course of wars, and subtly erase individuals from existence, then how many of the historical truths of the Warhammer universe are actually the result of their work? Maybe some of the Imperium's greatest victories weren't really victories at all, but carefully controlled outcomes. Maybe some of the most infamous betrayals were never betrayals to begin with, just a story woven by Vanus agents who needed a certain faction to fall. In the end, the Vanus Temple isn't about bloodshed. It's about rewriting reality, and that, more than any bolt pistol or neural disruptor, is what makes them the most dangerous assassins in the galaxy. If you want to understand just how powerful the Vanus Temple really is, you have to look beyond simple assassinations. Because unlike the other assassin clades, Vanus isn't concerned with single targets. They think bigger. They aren't here to put a bolt round through a rogue governor's skull. They're here to collapse entire power structures from the inside out. They don't just manipulate information, they use it as a weapon. And in the political labyrinth of the Imperium, where every faction is already teetering on the brink of paranoia and war, that makes them terrifyingly effective. The Imperium is an empire built on bureaucracy, secrecy, and fear. It's a monolithic nightmare of overlapping authorities, conflicting agendas, and factions that are just as likely to turn on each other as they are to fight the enemies of mankind. And the Vanus Temple thrives in this chaos. They know that in a system this convoluted, the right lie at the right time is more powerful than an entire fleet of battleships. A single falsified order, a subtle shift in astropathic messages, a fabricated intelligence report. These things can start wars, doom entire planets, or force the most powerful figures in the Imperium to act against their own interests without ever realizing they've been played. And here's the most unsettling part. Nobody can ever be sure if the Vanus Temple was involved. When an Imperial sector descends into civil war because one governor accidentally received orders meant for a different world, it just looks like a tragic bureaucratic failure. When a Space Marine chapter suddenly turns against the Inquisition over a forged accusation of heresy, it's seen as an unfortunate misunderstanding, or worse, an unavoidable escalation. But what if none of these things were accidents? What if the Vanus Temple was behind them all, pulling strings, guiding the Imperium along a path that only they can see? There's no doubt that Vanus has had a hand in some of the most infamous political crises in Imperial history. But which ones? That's the beauty of their work. We can guess, we can speculate, but we'll never truly know. Maybe some of the High Lords of Terra who mysteriously vanished from the political stage weren't assassinated in the traditional sense, but were ruined through carefully orchestrated scandals. Maybe entire Forge worlds have been wiped out, not by direct attack, but because Vanus agents subtly turned the Adeptus Mechanicus against itself, manipulating tech priests into sabotaging their own supply chains. And then there's the really disturbing possibility. What if the Vanus Temple isn't just manipulating Imperial politics to serve the Officio Assassinorum? What if they have their own long-term agenda? The Assassinorum is meant to be a tool of the Imperium, but Vanus operates with a degree of independence that makes them almost impossible to control. It wouldn't be hard to imagine a scenario where Vanus agents, after centuries of working behind the scenes, start playing their own game, one where they aren't just obeying orders, but actively shaping the Imperium in a way that suits their own hidden objectives. Some fans speculate that the Vanus Temple could be responsible for some of the Imperium's biggest internal conflicts. What if the Age of Apostasy, the brutal civil war that nearly tore the Imperium apart, wasn't just the result of a mad High Lord seizing too much power, but a carefully manipulated event? What if the Vanus Temple saw the Imperium becoming too centralized, too dependent on a single ruler, and decided to shatter it just enough to ensure its long-term survival? It's a wild theory, sure, but it fits their modus operandi. When Vanus acts, they don't just eliminate problems, they restructure the playing field entirely. And this is why they're so much more dangerous than a Vindicair sniper or a Calidus infiltrator. The others work on a personal scale. Vanus works on a civilizational scale. They don't just kill people. They kill ideas, kill alliances, kill stability itself. They make sure that when the dust settles, the galaxy looks exactly the way they want it to. The only question is, whose interests are they really serving? If you want to understand how the Vanus Temple operates, you need to forget about traditional assassination tools. They don't carry Exodus rifles like the Vindicair. They don't use polymorphine like the Calidus, and they don't rely on raw savagery like the Eversor. Instead, their weapons are far more insidious. Cogitators, data streams, encryption algorithms, and an army of machine-bound intellects that operate in the unseen world of Imperial information networks. If the other assassin temples fight wars in the physical realm, Vanus fights theirs in the digital one. The Imperium, for all its archaic and ritualistic nature, still runs on technology. And while that technology may seem crude by the standards of the Dark Age of technology, it's still powerful enough to control the fate of billions. Astropathic messages dictate the movement of entire fleets. Forge worlds coordinate vast supply chains that stretch across star systems. The Administratum keeps records on everything from planetary populations to the exact quantity of munitions available on a battlefield. All of this data is stored, transmitted, and, most importantly, vulnerable. The Vanus Temple understands this better than anyone. They don't just gather intelligence. They infiltrate, manipulate, and rewrite it. One of their most effective tools is their mastery over cogitators, the crude yet powerful computing devices that underpin much of Imperial bureaucracy. While most in the Imperium use cogitators in the most ritualistic and limited way possible, Vanus assassins treat them as weapons. They employ specially designed machine spirits to corrupt data records, fabricate orders, and erase crucial intelligence before it ever reaches its intended recipient. A planetary governor might never realize that a shipment of food supplies he was counting on was redirected to a war zone light years away until his people begin starving and rebellion erupts. An Imperial commander might believe he's being reinforced by an entire regiment of the Astra Militarum, only to discover, too late, that the reinforcements never existed at all. Then there are the crypto-warfare protocols, an area where Vanus excels beyond even the Mechanicus. While the Adeptus Mechanicus treats knowledge as sacred and encryption as a way to preserve the mysteries of the Omnissiah, Vanus sees it as a battlefield. They have developed some of the most advanced code-breaking techniques in the Imperium, allowing them to decode, intercept, and manipulate astropathic messages, fleet orders, and classified inquisitorial communiques. Some say that Vanus agents have even found ways to implant false memories into servitors and mind-scrubbed scribes, ensuring that even organic witnesses unknowingly spread misinformation. But what really sets Vanus apart is their use of thinker machines, otherwise known as cogitative strategists or cybernetic tacticians. These aren't true artificial intelligences, because of course that would be heresy, but they are highly advanced, borderline sentient logic engines designed to predict the outcomes of political movements, wars, and social unrest with terrifying accuracy. Imagine a machine that can process millions of variables, economic shifts, troop movements, planetary morale, even the personal ambitions of key figures, and then calculate the perfect point of leverage to tip an entire war in the desired direction. That's what Vanus assassins have at their disposal. They don't just react to situations. They see them coming before they even begin. Of course, the existence of these technologies raises an unsettling question. If Vanus has access to such advanced predictive systems, how much of Imperial history has already been preordained by their calculations? Have they subtly guided the Imperium's fate for centuries, using their deep networks of data? A manipulation to steer events in ways that serve their own unknown objectives? It's a chilling thought, and one that makes you wonder, are they truly servants of the Imperium, or are they something else entirely? A hidden force shaping humanity's destiny from the shadows, unseen and untouchable. The problem with trying to track the operations of the Vanus Temple is that their greatest successes don't leave any fingerprints. When a Vindicare assassin eliminates a target, there's a body with a perfectly placed exit wound. When a Calidus infiltrates an enemy stronghold, someone will eventually uncover their true nature. But when Vanus acts, it looks like fate itself conspired against the target. No dramatic duels, no bloody battlefields, just a perfectly orchestrated chain of events leading to total collapse. That being said, there are moments in Imperial history that have Vanus written all over them. The disappearance of Lord Solar von Hresk is a prime example. Officially, he was a brilliant commander who suffered an untimely accident while in transit to oversee a crusade. His ship's warp drive malfunctioned, his fleet was scattered, and the entire expedition fell apart before it even began. But what if none of that was accidental? What if the Vanus Temple decided that von Hresk's rise to power was a threat? What if they planted falsified navigation data, ensured that his astropaths received conflicting orders, and created just enough small-scale disruptions that, by the time the crisis unfolded, it seemed like simple misfortune? That's the Vanus way. No evidence, no confrontation, just erasure through engineered inevitability. Then there's the case of Hive Secundus on Bellis. This was a hive city that, according to official records, fell into a state of catastrophic rebellion after a breakdown in food distribution. But how does an entire hive, with centuries of logistical stability, suddenly implode overnight? Some theories suggest Vanus involvement, perhaps a subtle manipulation of supply lines, a few forged reports to reassign crucial shipments, maybe even an artificial famine that turned the population against itself. Within weeks, the Hive's ruling class was executed by its own people, and by the time the Adeptus Arbites restored order, there was nothing left to govern. If Vanus was behind it, the message was clear. Sometimes you don't need to assassinate a leader if you can make their own people do it for you. And what about the accidental execution of Inquisitor Calthor Merrick? He was an Ordo Hereticus investigator who had been digging too deeply into suspected Officio Assassinorum activities. According to official records, he was found guilty of treasonous behavior after classified information surfaced that tied him to radical elements. But some fans believe this was the work of Vanus, a classic case of turning the system against its own enforcers. Imagine the elegance of such an operation. Plant a few well-forged data records, manipulate astropathic logs, spread carefully curated whispers through the Ordo Hereticus, and let the Inquisition eat its own. Merrick's death wasn't just a removal, it was a warning, a reminder that even the most paranoid agents of the Imperium can be outplayed if you control the narrative. And that's really the terrifying thing about Vanus operations. Unlike other assassin temples, their work isn't about single targets. Their battlefield is entire institutions, entire planetary networks. If they want to remove a governor, they don't just kill them. They destroy everything that gives them power. If they want to collapse a rebellion, they don't fight it directly. They starve it of resources, cut off its leaders, and turn its supporters against each other. Their greatest operations aren't written down because they don't look like assassinations. They look like politics. They look like bureaucracy. They look like natural consequences of an unforgiving galaxy, which makes you wonder, how many of the Imperium's most tragic collapses weren't actually tragic at all? How many of its civil wars weren't spontaneous? How many of its greatest figures were eliminated not by a blade in the dark, but by a perfectly timed whisper in the right ear? Maybe we'll never know. Maybe that's the whole point. If you line up the major assassin temples of the Officio Assassinorum and compare their methods, the Vanus Temple immediately stands out. It's not just that they don't fight like the others, it's that they don't need to. Every other temple relies on a direct physical approach to assassination, whether through precision, deception, brute force, or sheer horror. Vanus, on the other hand, is the only temple that can eliminate a target without ever being in the same star system. Take the Vindicar Temple. They are the ultimate snipers, trained to eliminate high-value targets from miles away with unerring precision. A Vindicar assassin is a ghost on the battlefield, unseen until the moment they pull the trigger. Their philosophy is simple: one perfect shot, one perfect kill. They are surgical, methodical, and their presence alone can alter the course of a war. But at the end of the day, they still have to take the shot. They still have to be physically present, and if something goes wrong, if their cover is blown, if their exit road is compromised, they can be killed like anyone else. A Vanus assassin doesn't have that problem. They don't take the shot. They make sure their target never even gets the chance to be in the crosshairs to begin with. Then there's the Clade Temple, the shapeshifters and infiltrators who use polymorphine to disguise themselves as their enemies. A Clade assassin can walk into a warlord's throne room disguised as his most trusted advisor, slit his throat, and be gone before anyone realizes what happened. They are manipulators, yes, but their manipulation is personal. It relies on physical deception, close-quarter skill, and direct interaction. Vanus, by contrast, manipulates on an entirely different level. They don't need to replace someone to make them irrelevant. They don't need to wear another's face to destroy them. Why impersonate a warlord's advisor when you can forge an entire network of lies that makes the warlord believe his advisor betrayed him? Why risk being discovered when you can ensure the target eliminates themselves? And then we have the Eversor Temple, the exact opposite of Vanus in every conceivable way. Where Vanus is about control, Eversor is pure, uncontrollable destruction. An Eversor assassin is a living weapon, a chemically enhanced berserker designed to kill everything in sight. They are dropped into enemy strongholds with one goal: maximum carnage. They don't just eliminate their target, they slaughter everyone in the vicinity. The idea is that by making a kill so brutal, so chaotic, it sends a message to everyone else. But Vanus achieves the same goal without firing a shot. Where an Eversor assassin leaves bodies, a Vanus assassin leaves ruins. Instead of killing a general and his officers in a nightmarish bloodbath, they make sure his forces are wiped out in a supply chain disaster. His reputation is shattered by false intelligence, and his entire command structure collapses under its own weight. No alarms, no blood-soaked hallways, just a warlord disappearing into irrelevance. And then there's the most terrifying comparison of all: Culexus. These assassins are anti-psychers, individuals born with the rare and horrific pariah gene that makes them anathema to the warp itself. To psychers, a Culexus assassin is a walking nightmare, an emptiness that drains their very soul. They are unstoppable against psychic threats because they are unnatural. Even demons recoil from them. But what makes Culexus terrifying is that you can see them coming. You know when they are in the room. A Vanus assassin? You never even know they were there, and in many ways that's an even greater horror. The Culexus assassin is a void you can feel creeping toward you, an enemy you can recognize in your final moments. But Vanus? They never arrive at all. They make sure you never see the moment your fate is sealed. The uniqueness of Vanus lies in this fundamental difference. All other assassin temples are instruments of death. Vanus is an instrument of history itself, The others fight wars on the battlefield. Vanus fights in the shadows of records, orders, and whispers. A Vindicare kills a man. A Calidus replaces them. An Eversor eliminates everything in sight. A Culexus is a nightmare in the flesh. But Vanus, they erase the need for any of that to even happen. And that, more than anything, is what makes them the most unsettling assassins of all. For all their terrifying mastery of information warfare, the Vanus Temple isn't invincible. In fact, their greatest strength, the ability to manipulate events without direct confrontation, is also their greatest weakness. Unlike the other assassin temples, Vanus doesn't have a fallback plan if things go wrong. A Vindicare can escape after a failed shot. A Calidus can shift identities and disappear. An Eversor, well, an Eversor's plan B is usually just killing everything in sight. But Vanus? If their intelligence is compromised, if their plans unravel, they don't have any direct means of fixing the situation. They don't fight. They don't infiltrate. They depend entirely on control, and if that control is lost, they have nothing. And that's the real issue. Vanus is built on a fragile kind of power, a power that exists as long as their data is accurate, their misinformation is believed, and their targets react exactly as predicted. But the Warhammer 40K universe is inherently chaotic. The Imperium is a nightmarish bureaucratic mess where communication can be delayed by months or even years. The warp is unpredictable. The enemies of mankind, Chaos, the Tyranids, the Orcs, don't always behave rationally or even understand deception the way the Imperium does. The best Vanus plan in the world can be completely undone by something as simple as an Orc war boss deciding to attack the wrong planet just because he felt like it. There's also the problem of redundancy. The other temples exist in a very clear niche. Vindicare handles long-range precision kills. Calidus takes care of infiltration and deception. Eversor is a last resort for total annihilation. Culexus is the answer to psychic threats. But Vanus? Their role is much harder to define. Yes, they can manipulate the course of events through intelligence warfare, but how much of that work overlaps with other Imperial organizations? The Inquisition already runs some of the most advanced intelligence networks in the galaxy. The Administratum, despite its inefficiencies, still controls the flow of information across the Imperium. The Adeptus Mechanicus has its own cryptographic specialists. The question is, what does Vanus do that nobody else can? This is where opinions start to split. Some believe Vanus is the most indispensable temple because they can influence things on a scale that no other assassin can match. Others argue that they're completely redundant, that their work is already being done by other organizations. After all, why would the Imperium entrust something as delicate as information warfare to an assassin temple instead of, say, the Ordo Sicarius or a high-level administratum think tank? And if they were truly that effective, wouldn't we see more evidence of their work shaping Imperial history? Or is the point that we don't see it? And then there's the issue of how limited their actual influence might be. Yes, Vanus can manipulate events within the Imperium, but what about external threats? They can forge documents, reroute supplies, fabricate intelligence. But what happens when their target doesn't care about information? A Tyranid hive fleet isn't going to be swayed by a well-placed lie. A Chaos warband isn't going to rethink its invasion plan because a Vanus agent corrupted their supply lines. Necrons? Good luck hacking a species that barely even communicates the way humans do. In some ways, Vanus is terrifyingly effective against other Imperial factions, but far less useful against the biggest existential threats to humanity. That's the paradox of the Vanus Temple. They are both terrifying and fragile, incredibly powerful and strangely vulnerable. Their influence exists only as long as no one realizes they're being played. The second their deception is exposed, the second their control is lost, they become powerless. And in a galaxy this chaotic, where nothing ever goes according to plan, that's a very real problem. If there's one thing Warhammer fans love, it's uncovering hidden connections and theorizing about the forces pulling the strings behind the Imperium's most shadowy events. And when it comes to the Vanus Temple, the theories go deep. After all, this is the one assassin temple that could theoretically rewrite history itself. And if they're as good as their reputation suggests, then how much of what we think we know is even true? One of the biggest theories floating around is that Vanus might have played a role in the Horus heresy itself. Now, at first, that sounds ridiculous. Why would an Imperial assassin temple sabotage the Emperor's own war efforts? But when you look at how the heresy unfolded, it starts to raise some unsettling possibilities. What if Horus's corruption wasn't just a matter of chaos whispering in his ear? What if his fall was carefully orchestrated by a hidden hand, ensuring that the Imperium would be reshaped in a way that served a greater unknown purpose? Some fans argue that Vanus, or at least a rogue faction within the temple, might have manipulated intelligence networks, fed false information to key figures, or even planted the seeds of mistrust between the Primarchs long before chaos ever came into the picture. Then there's the theory that Vanus might still be shaping the Imperium's internal politics on a scale that no one fully realizes. The Imperium is absurdly bureaucratic, a lumbering machine of conflicting agendas, power struggles, and backroom deals. What if some of those deals aren't happening naturally? What if certain planetary governors, space marine chapters, or even inquisitors are being subtly steered by a hidden Vanus network that ensures the Imperium moves in a very specific direction? Maybe some of the wars that seem unnecessary, the ones that make no sense from a tactical perspective, are actually manufactured to eliminate potential threats before they can grow into real problems. Another theory suggests that the Vanus Temple isn't actually fully loyal to the Imperium anymore, or at least that they operate on a level where loyalty is no longer relevant. Unlike other assassin temples, which are given clear kill orders and execute them with ruthless efficiency, Vanus is different. Their work requires long-term thinking, manipulation of massive systems, and an understanding of the Imperium that goes beyond just serving the High Lords of Terra. Some fans argue that at a certain point, an organization like this stops being a mere tool and starts acting as a power in its own right. If Vanus has been secretly shaping the Imperium for thousands of years, who's to say they haven't developed their own vision for how humanity should function? And if that's true, then are they really assassins anymore? Or have they become something much bigger, an invisible empire within the Imperium itself? And let's talk about one of the wildest theories, the idea that Vanus might actually be the real power behind the Inquisition. We already know that the Inquisition has multiple ordos dedicated to rooting out threats, controlling information, and eliminating corruption. But what if they aren't actually in control of their own intelligence? The Inquisition is notoriously fragmented, full of internal conflicts and rival factions. Some fans speculate that Vanus might have subtly infiltrated the Inquisition's information networks, ensuring that certain truths are buried while others are brought to light. If this is true, then it means the Inquisition itself might not even be aware that it's being manipulated. Of course, the lack of concrete evidence is exactly what makes these theories so compelling. If Vanus is truly as good as they're rumored to be, then we would never be able to prove they were involved in anything. Every mistake, every conflict, every disappearance that could have been their doing has just enough plausible deniability that it's impossible to say for sure. And that, more than anything, is why the idea of Vanus is so terrifying. They don't just erase people, they erase truth itself. The Vanus Temple is one of those factions that could have an absolutely massive impact on the future of the Imperium, or they could fade into obscurity, their influence erased as thoroughly as the enemies they eliminate. And honestly, both possibilities are equally terrifying. If they're as deeply embedded in the Imperium as some theories suggest, then they could end up shaping the future of mankind more than any Primarch, High Lord, or War Master ever could. The biggest question is what role they will play in the current state of the galaxy. The Imperium is falling apart at the seams. The Great Rift has split reality in two. Communication across vast regions of space is unstable at best, and entire sectors have been cut off from Terra's influence. This is exactly the kind of chaos where Vanus should thrive. When information becomes unreliable, when chain of command collapses, the ones who can still manipulate and control what people believe hold the real power. And that's what Vanus does better than anyone. There's a strong argument to be made that Vanus could be one of the Imperium's last hopes for stability. With Guilliman trying to rebuild what's left of human civilization, the Imperium needs coordinated strategy, controlled narratives, and an absolute mastery over intelligence networks. Who else but Vanus is capable of making sure that orders actually reach the right people? Who else can ensure that misinformation planted by chaos cults, genestealer infiltrators, or even rival Imperial factions doesn't spread unchecked? If they can keep the Imperium functionally ignorant of its own impending collapse, that alone could buy humanity enough time to hold itself together. But then there's the darker possibility. What if Vanus sees this moment as their opportunity to take control? The Imperium is at its most vulnerable. The High Lords of Terra are more divided than ever. The Inquisition is a mess of conflicting agendas, and even Guilliman, arguably the greatest tactical mind in human history, is struggling to keep the ship from sinking. If Vanus has a hidden agenda, if they've been waiting for the right moment to shape the Imperium into something they believe is sustainable, this would be the perfect time to strike. And the scariest part? No one would ever know it was happening. Some fans even speculate that Vanus might not be acting in the Imperium's best interests at all anymore. There's a theory that their prolonged exposure to manipulation and deception has made them lose sight of their original purpose, that over the millennia, they've gone from being servants of the Imperium to being something else entirely. If Vanus has its own hidden doctrine, if they believe that humanity's survival depends on something other than blind loyalty to the Emperor, then they could be working toward a future where the Imperium as we know it doesn't even exist. And let's not forget the outside threats. The Imperium isn't the only power in the galaxy that relies on information warfare. The Tau Empire has its own propaganda networks and strategic deception methods. The Eldari Harlequins manipulate events on a scale that even Vanus would struggle to match. The Necrons, with their ancient and incomprehensible data systems, could pose a serious challenge to Vanus operations. And then there's Chaos, the one force that operates on a level of deception that even Vanus might not be able to counter. If Chaos gods can see into the future, if Tzeentch is truly the master of fate and manipulation, then how can Vanus ever be sure they're the ones in control? What if their most brilliant schemes are already accounted for, already woven into some greater, unknowable design? At the end of the day, the future of Vanus depends on one fundamental question. Are they still serving the Imperium, or have they become the architects of something far more dangerous? If they are still loyal, then they might be the key to saving humanity from its own self-destruction. But if they've decided that they know better than the Imperium itself, then it's possible that the greatest enemy of mankind isn't an external threat. It's the hidden hand. That has been guiding it all along. The Vanus Temple is one of the most frustratingly fascinating parts of the Warhammer 40k universe. They don't have the flashy kill methods of the Vindicare, the dramatic infiltrations of the Calidus, or the sheer brutality of the Eversor. They don't even have the nightmare-inducing presence of the Calexis. And yet, in some ways, they might be the most terrifying of all. Because while the other assassin temples eliminate individuals, Vanus erases entire futures. Their power doesn't come from a blade or a gun. It comes from control over what people believe, what they perceive, and how they react to the world around them. They don't kill leaders. They make sure leaders never rise in the first place. They don't destroy armies. They engineer logistical failures that cause those armies to starve, fracture, or turn on each other. They don't fight battles. They end wars before they even begin. And the most unsettling part? No one ever realizes they were there. That's what makes them so hard to analyze. Every other assassin temple has clear moments of impact. An Eversor leaves behind a pile of bodies. A Vindicare's bullet rewrites history in an instant. But Vanus? Their fingerprints are on everything and nothing at the same time. Every unexplained political shift, every mysterious disappearance, every war that seemed to happen for no clear reason. Could that have been Vanus? That's the real horror of it. The idea that there's an entire assassin temple rewriting reality from behind the curtain, shaping the Imperium in ways that even the High Lords of Terra might not fully understand. But that raises the ultimate question. Who are they really serving? The Imperium is built on the idea of unwavering loyalty, of absolute devotion to the Emperor. But Vanus is different. Their entire existence is based on deception, subterfuge, and long-term manipulation. How do you trust a faction that literally specializes in making sure you never see the full picture? Have they truly been acting in humanity's best interest all this time, or have they slowly become something else, something beyond the Imperium itself? And what happens if they ever decide that the Imperium is the problem? The reality is, we may never get a definitive answer. The Vanus Temple isn't the kind of force that reveals itself. If they are as powerful as the theories suggest, then they are already at work, shaping events we don't even realize are happening. They aren't just assassins. They are the architects of history itself. And the scariest thing about history is that it's written by those who control the narrative. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the Imperium's most shadowy factions, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. There are plenty more Warhammer 40k mysteries to uncover, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Until then, keep your eyes open, because if the Vanus Temple is real, then the moment you start noticing their work might just be the moment they decide you know too much.